I walked into the lawyer's office that morning with a knot in my stomach. Mom and Dad had never treated me like they treated my sister Amelia. Where she got private schools and praise, I got criticism for becoming a teacher instead of joining the family business. But nothing prepared me for what came next. On the video screen, my recently deceased parents laughed while announcing my sister would receive $6.9 million. Then Mom looked straight at the camera. And for Colin $1, go earn your own. My father nodded, while my mother smirked. Some kids just do not measure up. Before I continue, where are you watching from today? Hit that subscribe button and join me as I reveal what happened next when everything changed forever. Growing up in affluent Westchester County, New York, I always knew our family had money. Money did not change who I was, but it revealed who others were. True wealth was not in my bank account, but in my newfound self-respect and the genuine connections I had built. I no longer feel like the family black sheep because I stopped trying to belong to a flock that never valued me. Instead, I found my own path surrounded by people who appreciate me for exactly who I am. Have you ever had to stand up to family pressure for your own well-being? Comment below and share your experience. From my earliest memories, it was clear that my sister Amelia was being groomed for greatness. 4 years older than me, she attended Westchester Academy, the most prestigious private school in the county, while receiving additional tutoring in mathematics, French, and classical piano. My parents introduced her to the children of their business associates at elaborately planned playdates designed to forge connections that would benefit her later in life. I, on the other hand, was something of an enigma to my parents. Where Amelia was analytical, ambitious, and laser-focused on achievement, I was creative, empathetic, and more interested in people than profit margins. I loved to read, draw, and spend time volunteering at the local animal shelter. These pursuits were met with thinly veiled disappointment from my father and outright dismissal from my mother. Colin has his head in the clouds, my mother would tell her friends at dinner parties, while I pretended not to hear from the next room. We are hoping he will grow out of it. The favoritism showed in countless small ways that accumulated over time. Amelia received lavish birthday celebrations with dozens of guests and professional entertainment, while mine were perfunctory affairs with just family and perhaps 1 or 2 friends. When Amelia brought home straight, as she was rewarded with shopping sprees or weekend trips. When I achieved the same, it was met with a nod and perhaps a distracted, "Good job." By the time I reached my teenage years, the distance between my parents and me had grown into a chasm. I found refuge in school where teachers praised my writing abilities and creative thinking. Mr. Sanders, my 10th grade English teacher, was the first adult who seemed to truly see me. "You have a gift for understanding others," he told me, after reading my analysis of Atticus Finch. "That kind of empathy is rare and valuable." Those words stayed with me a lifeline when my home life felt increasingly alienating. During my junior year of high school, I made the decision that would permanently alter my standing in the family. I announced at dinner that I wanted to become a teacher. The silence that followed was deafening. My father set down his fork with deliberate slowness. "A teacher, with your opportunities, we did not build this legacy for you to throw it away on some idealistic fantasy." My mother added, her voice sharp with disappointment. "Teachers are important, of course, but surely you understand that is not the path for someone with your advantages." Amelia, fresh from her first year at Princeton, where she was studying economics, gave me a look of genuine confusion. "Why would you choose to struggle when you do not have to?" she asked. But I held firm. Despite their pressure threats to withhold college tuition and increasingly cold treatment, I pursued education as my major at Boston University. To their credit, my parents did pay for my education, as promised, though it came with constant reminders that I was squandering my potential. While I was finishing my teaching degree, Amelia was being fast-tracked at Morgan Stanley, her career accelerating at a pace that even my parents found impressive. Family gatherings became showcases for her accomplishments, with my contributions to the conversation politely acknowledged before the spotlight swung back to my sister. The last time we were all together was Thanksgiving, just 3 months before the accident. I had been teaching middle school social studies for 2 years by then, finding fulfillment in connecting with students who reminded me of myself at that age. Bright kids who sometimes just needed someone to believe in them. A teacher, with your opportunities, we did not build this legacy for you to throw it away on some idealistic fantasy. My mother added, her voice sharp with disappointment. Teachers are important, of course, but surely you understand that is not the path for someone with your advantages. Amelia, fresh from her first year at Princeton, where she was studying economics, gave me a look of genuine confusion. Why would you choose to struggle when you do not have to? She asked. I had moved into a modest apartment in Brooklyn, with my savings living simply but happily. At dinner, Amelia announced her promotion to vice president, the youngest in her division. My parents were ecstatic, opening champagne and making toast after toast to her success. When the conversation eventually turned to me, my father asked about my little teaching job with the tone one might use to inquire about a hobby. The funeral was a parade of financial and social elites, with Amelia accepting condolences with the perfect balance of grace and appropriate grief. I stood beside her, feeling like an accessory, the less important child who was expected to be there but not to draw attention. When Mr. Harrison, the family lawyer, called about the will reading, I was surprised. Actually, I was nominated for New Teacher of the Year for my district, I said, trying to keep any hint of defensiveness from my voice. How nice, my mother replied, with a practiced smile that never reached her eyes. Is there a cash prize with that? The news of my parents' death came as a shock, not just because of its suddenness, a private plane crash during a weekend trip to Martha's Vineyard, but because at 58 and 60, they had seemed invincible. The law offices of Harrison Bennett and Associates occupied the entire 42nd floor of a gleaming skyscraper in Midtown Manhattan. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of Central Park, a subtle reminder of the wealth and power concentrated in this space. The reception area featured original artwork, plush leather seating, and staff who moved with the quiet efficiency of those accustomed to serving the ultra-wealthy. Mr. Plush. Harrison himself greeted me with a firm handshake and professional sympathy. In his mid-60s, with silver hair and tortoiseshell glasses, he had been managing my family's legal affairs since before I was born. Colin, thank you for coming. The others are already in the conference room. The others included Aunt Patricia and Uncle William from my mother's side, 2 cousins I rarely saw, and Amelia, who was dressed in an impeccable black suit that probably cost more than 3 months of my teacher's salary. She air-kissed my cheek, her perfume expensive and subtle. "How are you holding up?" she asked, her eyes conveying polite concern rather than genuine warmth. "I am doing okay," I replied, taking a seat at the massive mahogany conference table. My parents, Richard and Eleanor Barrett, were not just successful investment bankers. They came from old money backgrounds that stretched back generations. Our sprawling colonial home sat on 3 acres with a pool tennis court and a view of the Hudson River that took your breath away. From the outside, we were the perfect American dream family. But inside those pristine walls, the dynamics told a different story. They looked healthy and vital, giving no indication that within months they would be gone. My father wore his standard power suit, my mother a cream-colored street John knit with her signature pearl necklace. If you are watching this, then, our time has come to an end. My father began, his voice as commanding in death as it had been in life. Eleanor and I have lived by certain principles that guided our success. Chief among them, true value comes from what you earn, not what you are given. My mother nodded beside him. We believe that inheritances often ruin the recipients. They remove the hunger that drives achievement. That said, My father continued, "We recognize that some have proven their ability to manage wealth and grow it." He turned to my mother with an approving smile. "Our daughter Amelia has demonstrated the Barrett business acumen and work ethic. She understands the responsibility that comes with privilege." They proceeded to outline Amelia's inheritance in meticulous detail. The family home in Westchester, valued at $2.4 million, investment accounts totaling $3 million, a portfolio of rental properties worth $1.1 million, and family heirlooms, including my mother's jewelry collection, valued at $400,000. In total, $6.9 million. Amelia maintained a composed expression, though I caught the slight lift at the corner of her mouth, not quite a smile, but the satisfaction of expectations met. Then my parents' attention on the screen shifted, and I felt a chill as both sets of eyes seemed to look directly at me. "As for our son Colin," my mother said, her voice taking on a harder edge, "we have considered his choices carefully." "Colin rejected the opportunities we provided," my father added. "He chose a path that, while respectable for some, falls far below the potential of a Barrett." My mother's perfectly composed face showed the faintest trace of a smirk. "Some kids just do not measure up, regardless of advantages given." My father nodded solemnly. "Therefore, to Colin Barrett we leave the sum of $1. He actually smiled then, not warmly, but with a cold satisfaction. "Go earn your own son. Perhaps that will teach you what we could not." The room fell into uncomfortable silence. I felt heat rising in my face, but forced myself to maintain composure. Aunt Patricia looked at her hands, while Uncle William shifted uncomfortably. My cousins exchanged a glance that mixed embarrassment with a hint of guilty fascination, like witnesses to a car crash. Amelia reached across the table and touched my hand briefly. "I am sorry, Colin. I had no idea they would do this." Her voice held practiced sympathy, but her eyes revealed no surprise. She had known, or at least suspected. I withdrew my hand and straightened my shoulders. "It is fine. I never expected anything different." Mr. Harrison cleared his throat again, clearly uncomfortable. "Well, that concludes the formal will as prepared by Richard and Eleanor Barrett. All documents have been filed appropriately, and, actually," a voice interrupted from the doorway, "there is one more matter to address." We all turned to see an elderly man I did not recognize. He wore a rumpled suit and carried a worn leather briefcase. Behind him stood a younger woman with a stenographer's notebook. Mr. Harrison's expression shifted to one of surprise. "Mr. Fielding, I was not expecting you." "Clearly," the older man replied, approaching the table. "But I am here on official business regarding the estate of James Barrett. My grandfather, my father's father, who had passed away 5 years ago. James Barrett's estate was settled years ago." "Mr. Barrett's," Harrison said with a frown. "Not entirely," Mr. Fielding replied, opening his briefcase. "James Barrett left specific instructions that certain documents were to be unsealed only upon the death of his son Richard, and only after Richard's own will had been read." He extracted an envelope sealed with wax and placed it reverently on the table. "What is this about?" Amelia asked, her composed facade showing the first cracks of concern. "Mr. Fielding looked at me, his eyes kind behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Are you Colin Barrett?" I nodded, my heart suddenly racing. "Then this concerns you most of all." He broke the seal on the envelope and removed several pages of heavy stationery. "James Barrett left a letter to be read at this precise moment, along with legal documents that my firm has been maintaining in trust." A memory flashed in my mind. Grandpa James taking me fishing when I was 12, just the two of us. Unlike my parents, he never compared me to Amelia, never made me feel less than. "You have a good heart, Colin," he had told me, as we sat watching our lines in the water. "Never let anyone convince you that is not valuable." Mr. Fielding adjusted his glasses and began to read. "To my family, and especially to my grandson Colin, If this letter is being read, then my son Richard has followed me into whatever lies beyond this life. I, on the other hand, was something of an enigma to my parents. Where Amelia was analytical, ambitious, and laser-focused on achievement, I was creative, empathetic, and more interested in people than profit margins. I loved to read, draw, and spend time volunteering at the local animal shelter. These pursuits were met with thinly veiled disappointment from my father and outright dismissal from my mother. Where others saw a child who did not fit the mold, I saw a young man with the courage to forge his own path despite tremendous pressure to conform. Therefore, I created a separate trust 5 years ago, just before my death. This trust holds my controlling interest in Barrett Technologies, the company I founded and built, which Richard chose to ignore in favor of investment banking. This interest comprises 51% of company shares currently valued at approximately $50 million. I hereby designate Colin Barrett as the sole beneficiary of this trust, effective immediately. My mother's scream cut through the room like a siren. "This is preposterous, a forgery," Mr. Fielding continued calmly. "The trust is irrevocable and has been legally maintained by my firm since its creation. All documentation has been verified and filed with appropriate authorities." Amelia's face had drained of color. "50 million," she whispered, her voice hollow. But Mr. Fielding was not finished. He turned the page and continued reading my grandfather's words. "To Colin, I am proud of the man you have become. Your decision to dedicate your life to teaching shows a wisdom your parents never achieved, the understanding that true wealth lies in the lives we touch, not the assets we accumulate. Use these resources wisely, and remember that money is merely a tool, not a measure of your worth. To Amelia, I hope someday you will understand that there are many forms of success and that your brother's path holds value your parents failed to recognize. To Richard and Eleanor, though you will never hear these words, I love you as my son and daughter-in-law, but I cannot condone what you became, nor how you raised your children. This is my final attempt to restore balance to our family legacy. With love and hope for healing James Barrett." The room erupted into chaos. My mother was on her feet, face contorted with rage and disbelief. "This cannot be legal. Richard was his only child. That company belongs in our family." "It still is in the family," Mr. Fielding replied calmly. "It belongs to Colin now." Amelia stared at me, her perfect composure shattered. In that unguarded moment, I saw something I had never witnessed before, naked envy in my sister's eyes. "Colin," she said, her voice dropping to a confidential whisper, only I could hear, "we need to discuss this privately. As family, we should share in grandfather's generosity." But before I could respond, my mother stormed toward me, finger pointed accusingly. "You knew about this, did not you? You and that sentimental old fool conspired behind our backs." I stood my ground, finding strength I did not know I possessed. "I had no idea, Mother. But Grandpa James apparently saw something in me that you and Dad never could." I turned to Mr. Fielding, still trying to process the magnitude of what had just happened. "I need time to understand all this." He nodded sympathetically. "Of course. We have prepared a complete briefing for you about the company and the trust. When you are ready, we can go through everything in detail." As the reality of the situation sank in around the room, I made a decision. Without another word, I walked toward the door, ignoring my mother's continued protests and Amelia's calls to wait. For the first time in my life, I was walking away from my family on my own terms. Mr. Harrison called after me. "Colin, you cannot just leave. There are papers to sign, arrangements to. I will be in touch tomorrow," I said without turning back. "Right now, I need some air." As the elevator doors closed behind me, I finally allowed the tears to come, not of sadness or even joy, but of vindication. Somewhere I hoped Grandpa James was watching, and that he knew his faith in me had not been misplaced. The legal battle began within 48 hours. My mother and sister filed an emergency petition claiming that grandfather had been mentally incompetent when establishing the trust. When that failed, they argued undue influence, suggesting I had somehow manipulated an elderly man from beyond the grave. Each challenge was more desperate than the last, each dismissed more quickly by the courts. I spent those first days in a daze, alternating between disbelief at my new circumstances and hurt at the naked greed my family displayed. I stayed in my modest Brooklyn apartment, ignoring the sudden flood of calls and messages from distant relatives and old acquaintances who had somehow heard about my change in fortune. The only call I took was from Mr. Fielding, who patiently explained the details of the trust and the company I now controlled. Barrett Technologies had grown substantially since my grandfather founded it. What started as a small software development firm in the early days of the tech boom had evolved into a mid-sized company specializing in educational technology platforms. The irony was not lost on me. The company my father had dismissed as a mere distraction from real finance was not only thriving, but aligned perfectly with my own professional interests. 2 weeks after the will reading, I met with Anthony Chen, my grandfather's longtime business partner and the current CEO. We sat in a coffee shop rather than the company headquarters at my request. I was not ready to step into that role publicly. Anthony was in his late 60s with kind eyes that crinkled when he smiled. "Your grandfather talked about you often," he said, after we exchanged pleasantries. "He kept track of your career, you know." This surprised me. He did. We only saw each other a few times a year at family events. Anthony smiled. James had his ways. He read every school newsletter where your name appeared. He knew when you started your teaching job and even which subjects you taught. I had no idea. I said, a lump forming in my throat. He was incredibly proud of you. He used to say, "My grandson understands what really matters." That meant a lot coming from James. But why did not he tell me about the trust, the company, any of it? Anthony considered this. James was a strategic thinker. He worried that if Richard and Eleanor knew about his plans, they would find a way to interfere. And I think he wanted you to establish yourself on your own terms first, without the burden of wealth or family expectations. He pulled out a small leather journal and placed it on the table. He asked me to give you this when the time came. It is his personal journal from the last 5 years of his life. That night, I sat on my small balcony, overlooking a Brooklyn streetscape, and read my grandfather's words by the light of a single lamp. The journal was filled with observations about the family, about the company, and most surprisingly, about me. He had indeed been watching from a distance, collecting newspaper clippings about school events where I was mentioned, noting down conversations he had with acquaintances whose children attended my school. Colin gave up a prestigious internship to volunteer teaching summer school in the Bronx. One entry read, Richard called it throwing away opportunities. He fails to see that Colin is creating something more valuable than money. He is building character and purpose. By the time I finished reading, dawn was breaking over the city skyline. I felt a profound connection to my grandfather that transcended death and a growing clarity about how to move forward. The first step was dealing with my family. My mother had left 17 voicemails, each more demanding than the last, culminating in threats of further legal action. Amelia had taken a different approach, sending carefully worded texts suggesting we collaborate on managing the inheritance, which I recognized as a thinly veiled attempt to gain control. I arranged to meet them at a neutral location, a private room at the Harvard Club, where my grandfather had maintained a membership. When we gathered, the tension was palpable. My mother looked as if she had aged years in weeks, while Amelia maintained her polished exterior, though strain showed around her eyes. "I hope you have come to your senses," my mother began without preamble. "This vindictive stunt of your grandfather's has gone on long enough." "This is not a stunt, Mother," I replied calmly. "And I am not here to negotiate shared control of the company. I am here out of respect for the fact that we are family. Family, she scoffed. Family supports each other. Family shares. Like you and Dad shared with me, I asked quietly. That silenced her momentarily. Amelia stepped in, her voice reasonable and controlled. Colin, you have to understand our position. Dad built that company as much as Grandpa did. He provided strategic advice connections. Dad ignored Barrett Technologies for years, I interrupted. He called it Dad's little hobby company and refused Grandpa's invitations to join the board multiple times. I found the letters in Grandpa's journal. My mother's face flushed with anger. Whatever your grandfather wrote in his senile ramblings is irrelevant. We are prepared to take this all the way to the Supreme Court if necessary. I looked at her sadly, finally seeing clearly what I had always sensed, that her love had always been conditional based on compliance with her vision of success. You will lose, Mother. Every lawyer has confirmed the trust is ironclad. But even if it were not, ask yourself, would Dad have wanted his legacy to be years of ugly court battles that drain everyone emotionally and financially? Do not you dare presume to know what your father would have wanted, she hissed. I am offering a compromise, I said, sliding a folder across the table. Barrett Technologies will establish a charitable foundation in Dad and your names. It will fund scholarships for underprivileged students interested in finance, honoring his career while doing genuine good. Charity, my mother practically spat the word. You want to give away what should be ours, Amelia. Ever the strategist was scanning the proposal. $5 million for the foundation, she noted. That is a fraction of what the company is worth. It is $5 million more than the $1 Dad left me, I replied evenly. And it is a way for this family to salvage some dignity from the situation. In the end, they rejected my offer, storming out with renewed threats of legal action. But something in Amelia's eyes as she left told me she knew they were fighting a losing battle. As for me, I felt an unexpected sense of peace. For the first time in my life, I had confronted my family as an equal without seeking their approval. 3 months later, the last legal challenge was dismissed with prejudice, and I began the process of truly taking ownership of my new reality. I maintained my teaching position, something Anthony found amusing but respected, while spending evenings and weekends learning the business from the ground up. Barrett Technologies continued to thrive under Anthony's experienced leadership, giving me time to find my footing. 1 year after the will reading that changed everything, I stood at the podium in the newly renovated gymnasium of PS 118 inches, the Bronx. Before me sat 200 middle school students and their families, gathered for the inaugural ceremony of the Barrett Educational Opportunity Scholarships. Education opened doors for me. When other paths seemed closed, I told the audience, these scholarships are designed to do the same for you, not just paying for college, but providing mentorship, internships, and support throughout your educational journey. In the front row sat Anthony Chen, now semi-retired but still serving as my advisor. Beside him was Sandra Martinez, my former colleague who had left classroom teaching to run the Barrett Educational Foundation full-time. And next to her, smiling proudly, was Julia, the art teacher I had met 6 months earlier when our schools collaborated on a district-wide project. Our relationship was still new but filled with promise, not least because she had known and liked me before learning about my changed financial circumstances. The foundation represented just one aspect of how I had chosen to use my inheritance. I had purchased a comfortable brownstone in Brooklyn, not a mansion, but a true home where I could host gatherings of friends and colleagues. I had established a fund for teacher innovation grants, allowing educators to pursue creative projects without bureaucratic obstacles. And I had created a technology incubator within Barrett. Technologies focused specifically on tools to address educational inequality. What I had not done was equally important. I had not quit teaching. 3 days a week, I still stood in front of my 8th grade social studies class, challenging them to think critically about history and their place in shaping the future. Those hours remained the most fulfilling of my week. I had received a letter from Aunt Patricia 6 months after the will, reading apologizing for her silence during years of witnessing my parents' favoritism. "Your grandfather spoke to me about his plans," she wrote. "He wanted someone in the family to understand his reasoning. He saw in you the values that the Barrett family was founded on generations ago, before wealth became our defining characteristic. As for my mother and sister, the news had been less positive. After exhausting their legal options, they had descended into bitter recrimination. Amelia had made a series of increasingly risky investments, trying to grow her inheritance to match mine, losing substantial sums in the process. My mother had retreated to a small circle of friends who reinforced her sense of victimhood. I had made multiple attempts at reconciliation, all rebuffed. The door remained open on my side, but I no longer defined myself by their acceptance. After the scholarship ceremony, Julia and I walked through Central Park, the early autumn leaves, creating a canvas of red and gold around us. "Your grandfather would be proud," she said, squeezing my hand. "Not just of the foundation, but of how you have handled everything." I smiled, thinking of the journey of the past year. I am still figuring it out honestly. Having money answers some questions, but creates whole new ones. Yet you are still essentially the same person, she observed. That is what matters. And she was right. Despite the external changes, I remained the same Colin who had chosen teaching because connecting with students fulfilled me in a way no amount of wealth could match. The difference now was that I had resources to expand that impact, and the confidence that came from knowing at least one person in my family had truly seen and valued me for exactly who I was. That night, I added another entry to the journal I had started keeping, inspired by my grandfather's example. "True inheritance," I wrote, "is not what is written in legal documents or measured in dollar amounts. It is the values we choose to carry forward, the purpose we discover, and the love we give freely without expectation of return." In the end, my parents had given me $1 and told me to earn my own way. What they never understood was that the most valuable things in life cannot be earned or purchased. They can only be recognized, cultivated, and shared. That was the real lesson my grandfather had left me, worth far more than $50 million. Where are you in your own journey of discovering what truly matters? I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to join our community of people sharing life's deeper lessons. And if you know someone struggling to define their worth beyond others' expectations, share this video with them. Sometimes the right story at the right moment can make all the difference. Thank you for being here, and remember, your value was never determined by someone else's measuring stick.